IVM.
Some time ago, 5 successful restaurateurs came together to form the Colaba Cartel. The founders of the table, Gauri, Devidayal and Jay Yousuf, partnered with the founders of Woodside Inn, Abhishek, Honawar, Pankil Shah and Sumit Gambhir to open a new restaurant in Colaba. If you've ever dreamed of opening a restaurant or love eating out, you want to listen in. The Colaba Cartel. This exclusive 10-part series is hosted by Gauri, Devidayal and Amit, Doshi.
Welcome to the first episode of the Colaba Cartel. I'm joined by my co-host Gauri Devidayal. Gauri, as an experienced restaurateur, I've got to ask you this question. What are the 3 most important things when you decide to open a restaurant?
Well, Amit, the cliche is true. It's location, location, location.
So, Gauri, over the course of the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk to Jay, Abhishek and Sumit to discuss the philosophy behind how you chose the location for Miss T. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we go into this conversation?
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll get to know more about what restaurateurs look for and what went on behind the iconic Colaba location that will be home to Miss T.
All right, guys, listen to this conversation. It's really, really interesting. I'm going to have a ton of fun hearing it. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey, so Gauri, I'm going to start off by asking you a first question, right? So how important is location? I mean, like when you look at a restaurant, how important is like, the first factor of location, right? I mean, like, how do you look at it?
It's definitely 50% of the success of a restaurant is the location. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you think it's that important, right, at the start, right? So when you start looking at a location, Jay, maybe you can address it. What goes into selecting one, right? What are the kind of factors that you look at when you're looking at a restaurant?
It depends. It depends on city by city. And in Bombay, it's not like where you can select the place. It's what's available in the market out there. So a lot of times location is, as Gauri was saying, it's 50% of your struggle to make the restaurant successful. In many cases, it depends on what's available out there.
So, Sumit, when you think about location, right? I mean, like, the availability, I understand, is an issue, right? But I mean, like, what are the major things that you want on your checklist to be checked off?
So in terms of the location, when we were looking for spaces for Woodside, we constantly were looking for spaces where there's a little bit of charm, there had to be a little bit of charm for the property, had to be a little bit of a laid back location. And we weren't particularly happy with a high street. And like Jay said, I think the part of the struggle, of opening a restaurant also involves dealing with good people and dealing with, when you're selecting a location, with the location comes, other factors like a landlord as well. And that's become a big part of the restaurant story in Bombay.
Right.
And getting into a location, finding the right landlord, someone who understands what you're doing, values what you do, has become a big part of this location discussion as well.
Okay. So Sumit, that's really interesting. Actually, that kind of brings a thought to my mind. So Jay, I'd like to follow up, the first question I asked you with, right? So one of the things that I've heard about the restaurant business in Bombay generally is that the locations you mentioned are kind of not, you can't pick and choose. You get what's available, right? What's the reason for that, right? Why is it that you can't just go to like some retail space and say, I want that space?
There's a lot of problems with that, especially with the usage. What's the properties used for?
Okay.
So first of all, if it is not a restaurant, then you have to do the change of user. The change of user takes a period of 6 months to just get that user. That's the initial part. So most of the restaurateurs, what they do is they try to find a restaurant which has all the licenses. That becomes easy. There are different licenses, as you know, there are about 20, 25 or something NOCs and licenses that you have to get for a restaurant. And then on top of that, if you want to go with alcohol, again, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
So if you have all that licenses, that property becomes a premium.
Okay.
And if you don't, then going through that process, you're looking at a year or 2, sometimes 3. To get that.
So again, another follow-up on that. So then, I mean, like, does that mean that the restaurants that you are, when you're deciding to go for a restaurant, So the license stays with the landlord. It's not for your particular because I would have to assume that the landlord, because otherwise how does it transfer from restaurant to restaurant?
It depends. I mean, nowadays, most of these properties, the landlord are getting involved to get the licenses. And even if you have the licenses, say, for example, when the restaurant is not working out and they want to exit, the restaurateur will make a deal with the landlord to transfer that to the landlord.
Okay.
Or there are places where the landlord has already procured the licenses on his name and it'll become a package deal.
Right.
So when you rent the restaurant, it'll be with the
licenses.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. That sounds like an extremely complicated way to do business. Yeah. Yes, Abhishek?
The industry is getting commercialized, and I feel like the landlords now understand the value of their property. And I feel they understand the value of having a restaurant business in that property. Hence, they have started now being a little more proactive and trying to retain the licenses on their name. So it comes like a real package.
Right.
And then it's easier for the whichever restaurant to come in, and in the event things don't go too well, and exit. So when the next person comes in, it's a clear entry point.
So I don't know how much. I'm sorry, Sumit, you wanted to add something to this?
So what has really happened in the past is that, people who used to run restaurants, they had they had procured the licenses, they owned the properties themselves, and then eventually realized, the sort of restaurants that they ran weren't doing as well, as time passed. And these are, the guys, who were leasing out their properties or renting it out. And they understood the business, they understood the restaurant business because they were restaurateurs, and they wanted to support a restaurateur when he came in as well. And these were the best landlords to work with in the first case. And we were very fortunate with the Woodsides, to start off with when we had landlords like this.
Right.
With our third property, we realized, we had to get the licenses on our own. And that itself, like Jay said, was a long process, very, very expensive. And it just pulled us back by a year. And so in terms of licensing, it's a real factor when you work on the feasibility of a project. And that's the reason why properties with licenses come at a premium.
So it seems like licensing and location are kind of intrinsically linked to each other, right? I mean, like one doesn't work without the other. But do you guys think that for the state of the restaurant industry, that's a good thing? Or do you think it would be... if licensing was a little less problematic, wouldn't that open up the supply for the number of spaces you could work at, which would reduce rents, which would do all... I guess these are arguments you guys are all familiar with.
No, for sure. If licensing was easier, the rentals that landlords ask for, would have definitely dropped.
Yeah.
And...
Just to add, I don't think that makes a difference because I have been in a situation where I was looking for a property which has all the licenses, and there are properties which does not have the licenses. But the landlord, they don't care. Okay. They know the number they're looking for, and they know what that area, neighborhood is commanding. And when the restaurant comes, when they want to rent a restaurant, that becomes a premium property.
Right. Okay. So
because always restaurateurs are charged more than any other retail or bank or any other businesses for that property.
Why would that be? That seems odd to me.
Because for a restaurant, there's a lot more elements to it because it's a 24/7 business, 365 days, and there are so many issues with the BMC, health, all that extra makes it very difficult for that property.
Interesting. Okay, I think we've spoken a lot about the licensing aspects. I think let's move on to something a little more interesting, I guess. Or actually, this is pretty interesting, but let's move on to something. So, one question I wanted to ask you guys is when you're looking at a location, right? What are your thoughts on working in food hubs as opposed to places which don't really have anything around, right? When I look at the kind of things that you all are doing, I look at Woodside or I look at Table, which is like bang in the middle of Colaba, where, you have a lot of people coming by and stuff, and, a lot of foot traffic and all that kind of thing. Then you look at something like Mac Street Kitchen, which is all the way in, well, it's not that far, but it's just like in a location which you would not really expect a, high-class restaurant to be. So, you've clearly got different views in terms of, or rather, you don't look at this as one size fits all, right? So what are the factors that go into those kinds of decisions? Gauri, would you like to address that?
So for me, there are two aspects to this. One is it's driven partly by what you want to do as a concept. So, if you're looking at something which is more sort of a chain sort of format, then, footfall is key, and then you want to be in a hub where that footfall is going to be really high. So whether it's a mall or whether it's in a financial sort of district or like BKC, for example. If you're looking at something like, the concept like the table, which is fine dining, it's a one-off location most likely in the city, one-time location, you probably are going to be more focused on getting what's best for that concept. And, for us being in a sort of area like Colaba, South Bombay, near the 5-star hotels, etc., was, being in an iconic location, if that's your one shot at it, is going to be primary. And I mean, Mag Street, on the other hand, is completely different. It's an event-driven space, so you're expecting people to not happen to walk in, but to come for a specific purpose. So I think, firstly, your concept sort of decides partly where you're going to be. And then the second thing is that, I mean, again, this goes back to the concept, but if you yourself as the restaurateur, enjoy going to sort of food hub kind of area, you would think of that as a location. Whereas if that's not really, your sort of target for yourself, or where you end up seeing yourself going frequently, you're probably not going to think of that, because a restaurant is very much driven by your own personality.
Right.
So it's also partly that that's going to decide where you end up being.
What do you guys think? I mean, like, so the table and the Woodside are different formats, right? I mean, like, in terms of your customer profile is different. Do you agree with what she's saying, or do you have a different perspective on this? Abhishek, would you like to take that?
Gauri's totally right. I think restauranting is an extension of one's idea and oneself. That said, depending on the concept, you kind of pick and choose an area that's suitable for the idea. But at the end of the day, you have to be a part of that idea.
Right.
You have to kind of be able to express yourself with that idea, in that idea. And I think that also plays a key factor to picking something. Personally, given a choice to be in a mall or a mall high street location or being in a neighborhood, we prefer being in a neighborhood because our restaurants are more neighborhood centric. The company is called Neighborhood Hospitality. So that's the way we think about it.
Yeah. Jay, sir.
No, just to add to it, Bombay and Delhi, they're two different cities. See, a lot of restaurants, high-end restaurants, fine dine restaurants have worked in Delhi in a mall kind of situation, but Bombay is not.
Right.
So it is happening because there's so limited space. Mm-hmm. So people have to force themselves whether they like the mall or not. That's where the properties are coming.
Right.
That's where the buildings are. I mean, new buildings, new developments are happening. BKC, for example. Mm-hmm. So people have to change their thoughts. I mean, whether they like that mall setting or not. Sometimes you do take chance of going to the mall. And because it has worked in other cities, so they think that it might work in Bombay also.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like, I think Kamla Mills is a great example of that, right? It's not exactly a mall, it's more like an office park, but it's turned into a major hub of all kinds of restaurants.
All kinds of restaurants, yeah. And not because everyone wants to be in Kamla Mills, because that's where the availability is.
And I mean, like, I see so many people who go to Kamla Mills and like do like crawls and stuff like that. They go like 4 different places in one night.
Exactly.
So, interesting. Okay. Let me move on to another question. What's a good size for a restaurant? Sumit, do you want to start with that question?
Again, it depends on the sort of restaurant you're building, and then also depends on the sort of services and the back end of the property that you want to provide. Mm-hmm. There are restaurants that have been built where 50% of the back end has 50% of the restaurant has been dedicated to the back end, and there are restaurants that just can't do that because they're tighter spaces.
Right.
So ideally, it depends on the requirement for any space. If it's a restaurant that requires big footfalls, it's a volume-driven restaurant, then you need to have a larger space.
Right.
And that's it's what works from the economies of scale point of view.
Right. Cool. Gauri, what about you? What are your thoughts on sizes of restaurants?
So I know that with when we've thought about doing restaurants in a sort of again a unique concept, it's usually a good sort of capacity is 80 to 100. That's generally considered an optimum capacity to have. Given the dining, trends in terms of how much people go out, things like that. So again, I agree with Sumit that your concept will also drive your space requirement, because, for example, with the table, I would say it's that same thing, that it's 50% back end and 50% front of house, because the food is such an integral part, and to deliver that you need a really sort of extensive kitchen facility.
Right.
Whereas, a cafe may not require that. And but again, going back to, the original point Jay made, it's based on inventory availability as well.
What you get, right? Yeah. That's interesting. It seems like everything comes back to what's available. Yeah. Right. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back after the break, getting a little bit more into what goes into selecting a restaurant and talking a little more about Misty specifically and how you guys came up with that place.
Long, long ago, not in Bethlehem, but in a place nearby, there was a wonderful birth of a huge show, which I like to call Cyrus Says. The show that encapsulates everything in human history, from the first Homo sapien to the last Homo sapien, who's traversed the entire world and then come back to India. This is a show which tells you everything about everything. If you want to know, avoid Google, come to us. It's called Cyrus Says. Get new episodes every Monday and Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts from. It's simple as A, B, oh God, what comes after that?
All right, welcome back, guys. And to dive right into it, I kind of want to ask a question which is of a great deal of curiosity to me, right? Parking is a massive issue in Bombay, right? And so when, when I was looking up, I was doing a little bit of research about, before this episode in terms of what people look at for location. In the US, parking is supposed to be like the most important thing. Don't mess with, if you don't have parking, don't do that. But I don't think that's clearly the same thing in India. But at the same time, I think it is important in the kind of places that you guys are working in. Like across from Woodside, when you used to have that Colaba parking lot that used to make it very, very easy to get to Woodside. Mm-hmm. Now that space is not as, I think it opens and shuts all the time. So I don't really know if it's open right now.
It's open right now.
It's open right now. Okay. But if it's, let's say, for example, it was shut, then at that point in time, how do you deal with parking does that affect things for you?
I think parking is a very important, aspect for location. Thankfully, majority of our locations, we don't have that issue, because we have by lanes that are available, and we don't have too many restaurants on those by lanes. So we're probably the only restaurant that's trying to park there. In the few locations that we have more restaurants surrounding us, I think we've been able to kind of take the necessary permission for the necessary amount of cars and so on and so forth. It must be nightmarish if you're stuck in a high street location in Lower Parel, roadside location in Lower Parel. I don't know how you kind of go about these things, because at the end of the day, you need to find a spot to put the car. And I have not seen these spots. Right. So there is something that these guys are doing, maybe making cars disappear or something like that.
Yeah, Jay, sorry, please.
No, when you did mention about America here, India, there's a lot of cars are driven by the drivers. Okay. You have personal drivers. That makes a difference.
Right.
And Uber and Ola has made a major difference.
That's what I wanted to check too, yeah.
And most of our clientele at MSK, I see a lot of Uber and Ola coming there. And valet parking. Mm-hmm. See, in US, you have valet parking. It's a very critical aspect of the restaurant, and they do charge about $10 to $15 and sometimes $20 for a valet parking. And people, the clients and the guests they don't care, because it's a part of dining.
Right.
So in India, we don't charge, but a lot of high-end fine dine restaurants, they have valet parking, and most of their clientele, they do have their own drivers.
Right. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to kind of get a little bit into before we got into specifics of Misty, right? And that was, how do you figure out what is an appropriate amount of rent to pay at a particular location? Right? At what point, there are, let's say, for example, you guys are, you're in the Colaba neighborhood. Let's say you found this amazing, awesome place, which was 10,000 square feet. It could do everything you could possibly dream of. It had all the parking in the world. It had everything that you could possibly imagine to make the best possible restaurant you could ever make.
Am I dreaming?
Well, I'm about to break that dream, right? At what point, when the landlord says that he wants 10 crores a month, or you start negotiating negotiating or whatever that number is, right? At what, or let's not even get to a specific number, right? But at what point do you figure that, this much is too much? What is too much for rent, right? Because there are really, really nice spaces that you have to maybe walk away from.
There is a rule of thumb. I mean, basically every restaurant or a restaurateur uses about 20% of their gross earnings. So that's the number you work backward.
Okay.
And there are different ways of renting space right now, right? There's a minimum guarantee. There's a only rental aspect of the property or minimum guarantee with the revenue sharing.
Okay.
So everything works with that. Between 15 to 20% is a good number.
Right. Is what you want to spend on property.
Want to stay on the property.
What do you want to spend on property? Okay, that makes it actually fairly objective, right? You agree with that in terms of like a thought in terms of the number itself?
I think if you go to every location, a general per square foot rate. Then if you're getting large spaces that could be used for certain usage, you might have, as a landlord, he might smartly think about it and say, okay, hey, this is 10,000 square feet. That means there has to be something that is going to create a large volume of, funds. I think maybe he could be slightly more aggressive with the per square foot rate.
Right.
Now, given that rate, he says, okay, hey, I'm going to come in with all the licenses intact. Fantastic. The rate goes up higher.
Right.
Then it goes back to the business owners, like Jay said, the appetite of risk is what comes into play. And if you feel like your idea that you have in mind is going to work, maybe you take it out.
Yep.
This is where the tax girl in me comes out.
Yes.
But, that's a big part today. In the last sort of 6 months or so, a year, GST has kind of thrown things a lot out of whack. And without getting too technical, you're looking at for restaurants specifically, you're looking at an additional cost of 18% on your rent. So, that's a huge factor to consider when you are sort of looking at rents and things. It's not just the rent that the landlord's receiving, but it's another easy 3-4% on that you're going to be actually spending in your cost.
Right.
Sort of.
Wow.
And one more thing I want to add, probably Gauri should have added this, no credit input.
That's why it's a cost,
Restaurants are
Restaurants
not
don't
getting
get credit input.
none.
That's why it's a
none.
cost. Otherwise, it's
not just the rent.
Be an issue.
It's for everything, every purchase that we are doing.
Oh, wow.
There's no credit.
Restaurants don't get credit input?
No, zero.
Oh.
Because the reason they did was the government came back. I mean, they had started with a GST of 18%.
Right.
They reduced it to 5% now.
Oh, I remember
so
that.
That's it. They killed
the input at that point. I remember that. Oh, but if you're not getting input, you can't spend it on rent either.
No.
Well, that's the point I was trying to...
You don't get a set off.
You don't
get a set off.
Oh my God.
So I think this is going to create, this is a reality check.
Right.
And I feel like this is going to create a certain shift in the amount of restaurants opening. This is my assumption. Could be wrong. Between 2019 and 2020, how aggressively the market was in 17-18 is going to be different from 19-20, and because of which we project the real estate market to soften in these scheme of things. And the positive of that is that you're going to see a lot more properties.
Right.
And as we see present, there are lots of restaurants are shutting because of this credit input.
Wow.
Yeah.
Directly or indirectly, I mean,
it puts more pressure on your margin, right? I
Yes,
mean, you have no margin left.
And I think that not a lot of people in the business, in the trade, have realized as clearly as we've spoken here that this is the problem. It actually weighs down. Gauri said 3 to 4%. I would say it probably weighs down 7 to 8% on your bottom line.
No, I meant on rent.
On rent. So on your bottom line is 7 to 8%, which is anyways diminishing.
Right. Wow.
And one thing I wanted to ask you. 28% is for the equipment and all, right? Today,
exactly.
GST is. That's 28%.
But even that's not being set off.
No credit input, even that.
How can you not? I can understand you're not getting set off for food inputs maybe, because those are slightly more unorganized sectors in some cases. How can you not get input for that?
Exactly. That's the cause of today's restaurant industry, the way the restaurant industry is today.
And also the sort of turnover of restaurants. This is, in the last year, there's been, I feel like, a higher turnover of restaurants. It's also a factor of a higher number of restaurants just opening in general. But this has been a big cause, but we digress.
Well, interesting digression though.
In fact,
please.
I just spoke to someone who had worked on the largest deals for restaurants in 2016-17. And he said the number of deals that he did, in 16-17 and the number of deals happening right now were 1/10 of what was really happening.
Wow.
1/10. So the number of restaurants opening are definitely going to reduce.
That's not a good situation.
No, but I just want to sort of circle this back to landlords. I think for them, and we can sort of talk about this more in the context of Misty, but I think now landlords are also becoming wary of, this turnover of restaurants, and they don't want to have sort of restaurants, sort of new restaurants coming in every year.
Right.
It's not just a matter of rent anymore. It's also about a location.
Sustainability.
There's the rumors start going around that the location is jinxed.
Yeah.
And it's also that every time a landlord signs a new lease, they give out, they have a few months of fit-out period, rent-free fit-out period. And so they're every year potentially losing, a couple of months of rent.
And
so
the brokerage commission.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really, really interesting aspect, which I really didn't expect that we'd be going into in this episode.
We're still a very positive lot, if you realize. We're smiling and we're enjoying our coffee.
And still getting into a new business.
We're getting into a new business.
Yes.
Some would say idiots.
Well, hey, you got to be happy dreamers.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what? Let's get into Misty a little bit, right? Let's talk about this location itself. How did you finalize this location? I mean, there's got to be a really interesting story around, two factors, right? One is you found this great location, and two is the five of you decided to work together. Only four of you here today, but you all decided to work together. So, I mean, there's got to be a story there. And I'd like to hear it, and I'm sure everybody else would like to hear it. So who wants to tell it?
So it was a fairly organic situation, that we had. And, we've all five of us have been friends for a reasonable amount of time. And the great part about having, good people in the business is that you sit together, you talk about work, you talk about your friendship and things like that, but you spend a lot of time talking about work. And we soon realized that, hey, we're like-minded people. We like the same things. And the interesting part is that we're reasonably successful at what we do in our own restaurants, which are different from each other. There came a point where, one of us got a call for the property that we're in. And, it was it came in the evening at 5 p.m. And, just heard the conversation. The conversation was more along the lines of that, hey, we have this space and, we don't want any changing situation. You guys seem like to be solid operators. Would you be interested? Basically, he said, yes, we're interested. Let's talk about this, by tomorrow morning. We happened to be having dinner with Jay and Gauri that night. So we all came together.
Okay.
And we had dinner and we just floated this idea. We just kind of spoke about it. And literally, our worlds kind of came together on this.
Yeah.
And in 24 hours, we had we kind of came together. The next 24 hours, we kind of just, loosely spoke about all the major aspects. And the next 24 hours, we took the deal.
Okay, that's fast.
We took the deal.
Yeah.
We just moved in.
That is fast, right? I mean, to decide that you're going to go into a space in a 24-hour period. I mean, that's got to be much faster than normal.
I think that was only because of the comfort level that we had as friends and as and the respect that we had for each other.
Right.
That is very lucky that we got done like this, because it doesn't happen. I mean, usually when you have a concept, when you think about working together or doing something on a restaurant, it might even take a couple of years to materialize. Mm-hmm. And I know everyone was talking about table getting to Bandra. So I have spent 3.5 years to make it happen, and yet we don't have it.
Right.
So it's very, it's just happened.
Wow, that's crazy.
I also think that with this specific location, it was literally we were talking about these perfect locations earlier, and it's probably as close as it gets in terms of the location, as well as, the fact that it was because there were restaurants and had its licenses in place and things like that. And it's a pretty iconic space in Colaba.
So how much pressure did that put on you, though? I mean, it is an iconic space, right? I mean, the space that was Busaba is now that's a big kind of this.
Yeah. Not only that, we are next to Indigo, the iconic, big, giant.
The first, fine dining, independent restaurant that existed.
Yeah, every day I do still get nightmares once in a while if I think about this. Yeah, are we really doing it right? Yeah, it's a big pressure, especially having the iconic restaurant like Indigo, there will be some new entity will come there.
Right.
So that'll be a big pressure on us, yes.
Yeah. So it is, it really is kind of, it's one of the spaces which, I've been familiar with for I don't even know how many years, and I know that a lot of people go there on a really, really regular basis. It's got to be difficult to kind of, to basically live up to that standard and exceed it also, hopefully, right? So, Abhishek?
I think, as far as this group is concerned, both the groups have restaurants, in this neighborhood. But put together, we are close to 19 years of experience, in Colaba, just specifically. And I think both the groups have toiled very, very long and hard to kind of do to be successful at what they're doing and keep their value set intact. And I think that kind of adds tremendous pressure to just take that value set and now do something with two groups coming together. So I think the dedication for every other restaurant has been high and we're committed and focused. But I think at this point we're all so zoned in into doing the right thing and making sure we deliver something that's extremely special. Mm-hmm. You know, the pressure is on.
It is. So Sumit, Busaba was always kind of a nightlife place as well, right? As the guy in charge of entertainment, what are you thinking for this?
No, so
cabaret.
No, I mean Busaba was known for Asian food as well. They had a lovely setting upstairs that did really well.
The food was amazing.
The food was great as well. Yeah, it did well as a space, and eventually it changed hands. It moved to another Asian restaurant.
Right.
And when we took over the space, we were debating what exactly we should be doing, and that's where we sort of went through the idea of working on the Asian food again, because that's something that all of us felt, in spite of us, in spite of options being there, we just felt that it'd be nice to have a space that had a little more soul, a little more of the sort of the aspect of having a bar that had a little bit of that you could hang out as well. And that's where we decided to try and see if we can work hard on the bar aspect as well. And when you're thinking of a bar, that goes with a solid restaurant, a solid food menu. Mm-hmm. You need to have great music as well. And that's something that, we're constantly now debating, trying to understand what's the right music for the right setting so that you have a special experience when someone walks in the evening.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question. So basically, you mentioned this a little bit, right? I mean, like you're the this is the third restaurant in a row, which is kind of an Asian restaurant in this particular location. Does the construction, the layout, the kind of the way a place is set up, does that kind of, I don't want to say dictate, but does that kind of influence the kind of way that you decide what kind of food you want to do or how you're going to conceptualize the restaurant?
Yeah, no, not at all. See, Table has been global cuisine, Utsaidin being a gastro pub. Mm-hmm. We were looking for something different. And it was the comfort. I mean, Indians have this love for Asian food, right? So we wanted to step back what we are doing and do something what people want today in Bombay.
Right.
So that's how the Asian Misty came about.
Right.
So it was nothing, not because the space before was Busaba or Lemon Leaf.
Right.
We didn't even consider that. So when we sat, all of five of us together and say, hey guys, what's next? What are we going to do? So we went through from tapas bar, Spanish tapas bar to Mexican to pizzeria. And then
I need to have a conversation with you guys later about why Mexican restaurants don't work in Bombay. But that's a whole different thing. But sorry, Gauri, you had something to add?
No, I just want to say, the table was an Irani cafe before the table. So we'll end on that.
Okay, so I guess that is a great way to end. So it has absolutely nothing to do with the location. It is what you decide that you want to put there.
What we decided, yes.
All right, great. So guys, that was a really fun conversation. Interesting stuff about the complexities behind finding the right locations.
Yeah, and I think you also got a bit of a teaser about how we all got together, but if you want to know more, then stay tuned for the next episode.
Yeah, that's going to be really exciting. In the meantime, guys, please also make sure that you're following us on social media. If you want to follow the Misty restaurant, that's Misty Colaba on Instagram or Twitter. Gauri is at Devidayal on Instagram, and also please make sure you're following IVM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Yeah, it's IVM here, let's go. We the IVM kids on the block over here. Just to talk, taking a break from producing all day. Coming on this podcast cause we got stuff to say. IVM Daily is the name of the show. Monday to Friday, we ready to go. Talking about stuff in our head. We might even talk about our favorite bread. Signing out, it's IVM here, the podcast network that's in your ear.
Catch IVM Daily Monday to Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Shunyawan, 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 Shunyawan. billion acquisition, another copycat startup got formed.
No, the tech world in India is surely moving double the speed of this voiceover.
Tune in to Shunya One every Tuesday to catch us talking to the smartest people we know on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.